the only president who combines the sordid extramarital affairs of a young JFK with the dead-eyed puffiness of a post-Watergate Richard Nixon.
And a knife that's not a knife because it's smaller than the other knife.
And even his closest aides believe him to be dangerously unfit for office. And they obviously have a very strong case since Trump knows virtually nothing about the job.
Ah, man. Here we go again.
Hello there.
Okay, so for the first time in Mr. Mitchell history, we're doing a video where Trump will be the main focus of the video. And to be honest, I was reluctant to cover the topic because he was so covered to death during the last 4 years. But the frustrating thing was that policy was almost never the topic of conversation. It'd be late night comedians making some cheap joke about having a clown in the Oval Office, or Trump not shaking some world leader's hand. And so after last week's Obama episode, I was tempted to end the US-China series right there and then. But the reality is that the Trump administration had the most important policies in shaping the current US-China relationship, yet the common man knows almost nothing about this compared to, say, Trump saying 7-Eleven.
Down there, and I watch our police and our firemen down on 7-Eleven, down at the World Trade Center.
And so for context, well before Trump even considered running for president, he appeared on Oprah criticizing the American government for importing heaps of manufactured goods from Japan.
We let Japan come in and dump everything right into our markets and everything. It's not free trade. If you ever go to Japan right now and try to sell something, forget about it, Oprah. Just forget about it. It's almost impossible. They don't have laws against it. They just make it impossible.
For Trump, for America to import goods and for America to give up manufacturing jobs to other countries was to lose its spot as the world leader. And when it came to trade, there were simply winners and losers. This was his worldview, and as Trump recruited Steve Bannon to be his campaign advisor for the 2016 election, he found someone who shared that exact same worldview and someone who would direct Trump's attention towards China. By 2016, America's trade deficit with China had soared to over $300 billion US, and this provided Trump with an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. On the one hand, Trump could appeal to US patriotism by vowing to take stronger action against Chinese manufacturing. But he could also offer jobs to unemployed factory workers in key battleground states like Iowa, who'd seen steel jobs go to China. He even proposed a 45% tariff on Chinese imports to discourage businesses from importing from China, and in true Trump fashion, he said this about them.
You got to fix the problem, because we can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing. It's the greatest theft in the history of the world.
Obviously, Trump won, and after winning the election, he made the surprising move of taking a phone call from the president of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen. This hadn't been done since Jimmy Carter had moved America towards the One China policy, in which Taiwan was recognized as being a part of the PRC. But Trump came out saying that he wasn't bound by that policy. And so about 9 months into Trump taking office, the trade war with China began. And over the course of 2017 to 2019, there were 4 key battles within this trade war, as both nations sought to be the leader in some key industries. Firstly, in October 2017, the war began with a battle over solar panels and washing machines. Basically, the Trump administration had commissioned a report into where American manufacturers were suffering the most, and decided to start with these two and put tariffs on $10.3 billion worth of imports. In return, China set its sights on the US agricultural industry and whacked a 178.6% tariff on sorghum grain. Now, it's important to consider the role that population plays here. America has a population of 300 million, whereas China has a population of 1.4 billion. And so in terms of pure market size, for China, not being able to sell to America is nowhere near as bad as America not being able to sell to China. Ultimately, the first battle was settled in May 2018 when the two agreed to cancel the tariffs. However, by May 2018, the battleground had moved to other industries, and America had set its sights on steel. Basically, in 2017, Steve Bannon encouraged Trump to commission another report on steel and aluminium, and whether America was too dependent upon foreign steel. Now, Bannon went on record and said that he had a secret weapon behind persuading Trump to do this report, in that if America was too dependent upon foreign steel, it would actually pose a national security threat due to all the uses of steel in warfare.
Continue with the operation. You may fire when ready.
What?
The report gave Bannon exactly what he was after, and Trump whacked a 25% tariff on all foreign steel and a 10% tariff on aluminium. Funnily enough, China was not the country worst affected by this. It was actually Canada.
What exactly does Canada want?
We want more money.
And so Trump gave a temporary exemption to Canada and Mexico, and then the EU, Australia, South Korea, Brazil, and Argentina. Obviously, China retaliated, and they placed tariffs on aluminium, pork, and fruit, and the trade war was well and truly on. And so the third battle that took place was around technology companies, and it was pretty much America putting tariffs on tech companies that were deemed to have committed intellectual property theft. Now, disclaimer, every growing empire in history has done this, including the USA. For example, in 1791, Alexander Hamilton, and no, not the guy from Hamilton, the guy who Hamilton is about, authorized the Treasury to pay $48 to subsidize the living expenses of English weavers, who pledged to deliver to the US a copycat version of the British spinning machine. One of those was Slater the trader, who disguised himself as a farmer and took the technology back to America. Basically, when America conducted its report in August 2017, China accused them of only caring about intellectual property laws now that they had intellectual property worth protecting. Now, it might seem like a stretch to go all the way back to the 1700s, but for China's point of view, it isn't. Their history goes back to BC. For America, it's a couple of centuries old. And so the 1790s doesn't feel as long ago for China as what it probably does for America. Now, Trump threatened 25% tariffs on 1,333 mechanical and electronic products, to which China returned the threat with 25% tariffs on cars, planes, and soybeans. Then in May, America announced that it intended to restrict the visas granted to Chinese citizens to protect their intellectual property. And then this battle really heated up. In June 2018, Trump placed tariffs on semiconductors, and then in July, the US put tariffs on $234 billion worth of tech products. In January 2020, the USA and China signed the Phase 1 agreement, in which China would purchase $200 billion worth of US tech imports, but most of the tariffs would remain the same. In October 2021, Biden announced that he'd continue with this agreement.
U.S. President-elect Joe Biden says he won't immediately scrap the Phase 1 trade deal that Donald Trump signed with China.
So now onto the fourth battle of this trade war, and the fourth battle was very similar to the third, except they were going after the huge Chinese tech companies who had worked against US strategic interests. For example, in April 2018, the USA prevented American tech companies from selling to ZTE Corporation because they had traded with Iran and North Korea. In the same month, they began an investigation into Huawei for also allegedly trading with Iran. In return, China prevented multinational company NXP from being bought out by American company Qualcomm, and then the USA put a $1.3 billion fine on ZTE for breaking those sanctions with Iran and North Korea. Ultimately, ZTE paid the fine and replaced its management, and the US allowed American companies to once again trade with them. However, China fired another shot in July of 2018. By the way, as a side note, how good a time of life was July 2018? But they fired that other shot by banning the American company Micron from selling certain microchips to China. Now, the trade war had a few other battles too, such as the automotive battle with the EU and the immigration battle with Mexico, but on the whole, these four battles were the main ones that took place between the US and China during 2018. In June of 2019, President Trump and President Xi reached something of a truce where they would ease on the tariffs but keep the existing ones in place.
We had a great meeting, and we will be continuing to negotiate.
A three-person WTO panel found that the Trump administration's tariffs violated global trade rules because they had been applied only to China, and they exceeded the maximum rates that the US had agreed to without adequate explanation. In 2019, official figures from China showed its second quarter GDP growth at its slowest in 27 years. While in December of 2019, the American manufacturing sector fell into its deepest slump in over a decade. But these are perhaps irrelevant stats. For both Trump and Xi, short-term economic growth was never the end goal. It was having global supremacy in the trade game. There were probably three goals that Trump had in mind at the beginning of the trade war. Firstly, to reduce America's trade deficit with China, which by all measures wasn't achieved during the trade war. Secondly, to slow the economic growth of China, which it did temporarily, but in the long term it really hasn't put a huge dent in China's economic growth. And then finally, and this one is perhaps a little bit of speculation, but perhaps this was a strategy to destabilize Xi Jinping in favor of a president whose focus was more on economic growth, rather than building a nation that would topple the USA as a global superpower. And it doesn't look like Trump has had much luck with that either.
Xi Jinping is a master Machiavellian politician. He's currently running a purge within the party. His likelihood of reappointment is still very strong.
So, China won the trade war, and it's estimated that in terms of all measures of economic data, China's rise to the very top has been fast-tracked to an estimated 2026. And so if you're watching this, be prepared. Thanks for watching. This series has been a lot of fun to make, but it's an incredibly important one. If you haven't already, I'd strongly encourage you to go back and watch our previous videos on the historic US-China relationship. Next week we're looking at Bin Laden, and we can't wait to see you next time for our next venture into a fascinating part of history.